Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for making it to this month's webinar. I'm really excited to talk about some really interesting cybersecurity concepts around web traffic protection, files in transit, how we can analyze and protect ourselves from uh, things we use every day. I'm Nate Medeiros, the product owner of technical certifications for OPSWAT Academy here at OPSWAT. And it's a pleasure to have Adam Rocker here as our guest speaker. Adam, can you introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about your experience in the field?
Yeah, Nate, thanks for the time. I've been in the endpoint and network security industry for just over 24 years. I spent a little over 20 of that at a company called McAfee, and in starting out in support, moved to their tier 3 support, and then eventually into product management, covering the McAfee SIM and the vulnerability management, risk and compliance, and that type of thing. So, here at OPSWAT, I get to bring a lot of those concepts over. We address some problems, some of the same problems in different ways, and it's cool having the context of of those two businesses to really paint the picture of that broader sense of layered security. So thanks.
Right. Well, great. It's a pleasure to have you. Today we're going to be talking about ICAP, Internet Content Adaptation Protocol. Last month we had a webinar on email security, and this kind of flows nicely into this subject, where email is something that we use on a daily basis, but interacting with the internet is something that all of us do for work,
Right.
for leisure, and that in itself, like email, even though it's extremely common, has so many layers and potential threat vectors for vulnerabilities, for ways that hackers can get access to a system, rootkits, websites, what have you. There are
Right.
so many things um, that a hacker can do to target an individual or a corporation. So this concept today that we're going to be talking about for the audience is about one of the ways that we can address this threat
Right.
through the usage of ICAP. And before we get too far into the weeds, can you tell us a little bit about what ICAP is and how
Sure.
does it work?
Yeah. So ICAP as a protocol is defined in an RFC. So it's something that anyone can contribute to, but it's fairly well established. And essentially, it was created to fix a problem that existed in network security. So there's a lot of different network security products out there, whether it's F5, A10, Citrix, ADC. There's a lot of different load balancers, reverse proxies, API gateways that can protect the network from the outside. You've got a bunch of untrusted users, untrusted files, and the thing is, those network appliances do great at what they're designed to do, which is protect the network traffic that's coming in, to protect against a DDoS attack, or just plain straight out hacking attempts, brute force attempts, trying to leverage certain vulnerabilities that a router might have, or some sort of firewall, a WAF, which have you. They all do great at protecting the network from those traditional network style attacks. What they don't really do, and this is where ICAP it shines, because it does exactly what the industry wanted it to do, is it provides a way for those specialized security appliances to offload certain traffic for additional analysis. Right. So in the case of a load balancer, load balancers do great at load balancing, right? And they provide a level of protection, but they don't do any content inspection of that traffic, right? So there's that difference between looking at the network traffic versus looking at the file traffic. And so inspecting that file traffic is what ICAP allows these network appliances to do. They don't have to do the work themselves. It just gets offloaded to a bespoke scanning service that will take a look at the file contents, give it a thumbs up, thumbs down on whether or not it's it's allowed to be in the network, and then the traffic continues from there. But very seamless, very out of the way. Like you mentioned, email. Security is not just for corporations, right? When
Right.
we talk about uh, when we talk about network security of a bank, right? Like sure, the bank is concerned, right? Because they have to answer to their shareholders. Uh, we need to be concerned as consumers because we have accounts at those banks, right? So it doesn't just affect the shareholders; it affects our daily life. So when we talk about email, that's something that everyone knows and is aware of. ICAP is one of the things that kind of runs beneath the surface. You don't really even see it, but
Right.
it's helping protect us day to day.
So if I could simplify that, maybe
Sure.
you mentioned that there's uh, firewalls and load balancers and other tools that handle that network traffic. Those
Correct.
are pieces of information being sent in packets, but they don't do anything about that assembled endpoint
Correct.
for when those packets are assembled into a file. And,
Correct. Correct.
and then that's when ICAP comes in, when the content's actually put together in a functioning piece of data that can be executed and run. We
Right.
then need some layer of security that says, okay, this fully assembled uh, uh, conglomeration of packets and bits,
Hmm.
is this safe or not? And then
Correct.
that's kind of where we bring this in place.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. And then you mentioned with banks. I mean, it goes so many layers further than that as well. I mean, even
Sure.
things like our power grid.
Yeah.
Those are, if somebody's doing a remote update with the firmware on one of those human machine interfaces, those are
Hmm.
files that are getting sent over the wire and assembled at the receiving endpoint and being executed and installed on a critical system that if there's
Yeah.
some kind of threat in a supply chain or whatever it is, even if it makes it past that network perimeter, the traditional network perimeter, as we all imagine it, as the
Right.
big bubble around all of our
Right.
sensitive systems. What's that next step? And so I'm going to pull up a diagram here. Maybe we can talk a little bit about how this actually
Sure.
performs this. I'll pull this up. All right. Can you see this? Yes. Looks like
Yeah.
we're here.
Here we go. Yeah. So essentially, let's take banks for example, because they're making use of a lot of files, right? Whether you're um, applying for a mortgage, or there's a whole litany of things that money, right? Whether it's how we pay for our groceries, or the money in our bank accounts. It's a very important thing to businesses and to individuals. For example, if you have to send something to your bank, that means that your bank has they have an application that allows people to interact with it to upload files. The bank might know their user, right? There are several know your customer type laws where you have to get some sort of personal information about the users of the system. Other systems don't necessarily have a whole lot of authentication, so you could have a file upload portal, right, for your mortgage company, and you can upload files, whether it's your work history, your pay stubs, or whatever it is that you need to send to the mortgage company. You're generally going to upload those to a site, right? You don't want to send them through email because email is generally not encrypted. You want to upload it through a secure source. So the thing is, the bank, they can put some restrictions in place to say, we only want our users that we know to upload files. Well, that's difficult to do, and in general, whenever you have a file upload process, uh, unauthorized users are generally going to have some sort of access to it, to upload information. Let's say it's to open a new account, and you're uploading information to create a new account on that in that bank. When those files are uploaded, you really need to be able to scan them, right? Because we're not talking about an active hacker that is trying to get into the network with hacking tools and stuff like that. They might want to upload a malicious file or
with a macro or something that runs.
Right, something embedded in the file, or it could even be a known user that wants to upload a file and they don't realize that their system has been compromised. So all the good files they have need to be sent in. So, whether it's a known user or unknown user that's uploading something into the system, where ICAP comes in is even before it hits the application, that the web application that's hosting that file upload, you're going to have some sort of network appliance that sits in front of it, right? So it could be a load balancer. It could be
reverse
like an
proxy,
F5
proxy.
WAF, or ingress controller with Nginx, anything like that. All of those things are going to give a thumbs up, thumbs down for the network traffic, but they're not going to do anything about, like what you talked about before, those assembled packets that represent a file. So what an ICAP client does on your ingress controller, load balancer, etc., is it knows that there are files in the traffic, and so it says, I don't really know what to do with the files. I don't have the scanning technology to render any sort of verdict on those files. So I'm going to send them to someone else. I'm going to have somebody else do the work, and then all I have to do is wait for the response. And so, you can see the files come in, and then, they get handed off to the ICAP service before they even really reach the network. And so that's one of the benefits of ICAP, is that it sits right at the perimeter. We like to talk about, scanning as finding a choke point. Where are all the files coming in, through this one place, so that we can scan them all, using the same policy, using the same engines and DATs to ensure that, we get consistent visibility across the network.
Right. That's a pretty common practice with malware mitigation, is if you're going to have a point of data transfer, you should know exactly where all of them are. And then that's where you can set up your layers of security.
Right.
And so this, like you mentioned, it's a handoff as part of the normal web request process. And that's
Right.
where the ICAP comes in. We actually have a question from a user asking in the diagram, what's the sequence? What's the order of events here? I think that's a great question.
Sure.
So let's go with this user on the top here, who's accessing the file download from the internet. What between her device, the internet, that web traffic controller, if it's a proxy server or a load balancer, whatever it is, and the ICAP. So what's that sequence event for that top user flow?
Sure. So the user is going to go to the internet, right? They may need to go to a partner website, or even one of their own internal sites, to download a file, and a productivity document that may need to get sent to whatever other number of users after, but they've got to add their input to that file. So the file is downloaded. Because that file is shared among many different people. It might be shared across companies. We do that with our partners. We'll collaborate on a Word doc or something. And what's great to do is scan that content as it's coming in, right? So in this case, the person on top says, I need to download a file as it is coming down from the internet, wherever it was stored. It's going to go through a network appliance at some level,
Which is this item in the middle that we have here.
Yeah, the box in the middle. It'll forward it over on the right to the ICAP scanner, and you can do several things with ICAP. ICAP just defines the protocol. It's the handshake. It's the communication back and forth between the client and the server. What happens on the ICAP server can be many things, right? It can be your traditional virus scanning. It can be multi-scanning where you're using more than one engine. It could be stuff like DLP.
Data loss prevention.
Right. And then, of course, data sanitization, right? So, if you really need to make sure that anything that you're downloading has no potential to carry any sort of zero-day type attacks, things that can't be detected by traditional AV approaches. Data sanitization or deep content disarm and reconstruction is another way where you can remove anything that's active from a file, so that there's no places for potentially malicious content to hide, and we can do that without really messing with the file, right? So the user could download it, it could go through the ICAP scan in the middle, and get passed over to the for file analysis. Any number of things can be run against that file, and then we just give a thumbs up, thumbs down, or we give a sanitized file back to the box in the middle, and it goes to the user.
Okay, so we go user,
right?
Users making a request through the proxy server in the middle to
Mhm.
the internet, says, hey, I want a file. Internet's returning the content of that file. It gets, as that content's coming in, it gets assembled into a readable, actionable file. But before it goes to her, it first goes to
Right.
the right for analysis. And then a signal is sent back to that center proxy server that says yes or no. Depending on that result, then she can receive that file.
Yep.
So ICAP can actually not only just give a thumbs up or thumbs down, it can actually, you mentioned a sanitized version, it can provide back
Yeah.
an alternate version of that file. So if we
Yep.
wanted to obfuscate with DLP, remove all the social security numbers or something, that'd
Correct.
be more of an outbound thing. But that's
Yeah.
what that
So
would happen.
any sort of content inspection, right? So ICAP gives us the infrastructure and how it should work, because we don't want to have to create a direct integration with every different vendor out there, and every different vendor out there doesn't want to have to create their own integration. So ICAP is a great way for all these security tools to get on the same page and speak the same language, so that very seamlessly, without having to do any infrastructure changes or any API coding, you can have a network security device talk to some other sort of scanning service that are completely different, right? But because they're talking ICAP, they can do that handoff without any issue.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because while this, may not be used in every circumstance, almost every enterprise environment is going to have some kind of proxy or a load balancer or
Yes.
something that actually has the ability, even if the IT administrator doesn't understand that or isn't aware of it.
Right.
Uh, their existing services actually do support this protocol.
Sure.
So it's more of a plug and play than a lot of other scenarios when you're
Oh,
talking about inline
it
analysis.
it is the most plug and play type of integration that I've seen. Right. The way that you can simply set up an ICAP server and just start sending it file data. Right. As long as you can send send the file data over, you can do a lot of cool stuff with ICAP without even impacting the users, right? Users
Right.
are in general not even going to see that going on behind the scenes.
Because if, let's say, if it's a reverse proxy for a server, you don't have to say, I'm going to block or allow this traffic based on the ICAP response. I could just send it over for analysis, but the users can continue using it as normal, right? Because it's all up to the actual proxy or network appliance configuration as to what you do with that response.
Yeah, in general, when you get a 200 or a 204, depending on whether or not the file was already clean or if the file had to be modified, um, you can send the file on. Generally, they don't. right? The idea is,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to say that wouldn't be a very sensible use case if you're going to knowingly send a detected malicious
Now,
file back to the user.
now there are some things, right? So there are some cases where, let's say you may have a file, and we're kind of getting into what we can do in an ICAP server,
Hmm.
but you could say, well, I'm going to flag this file because it's out of policy, right? Not everything that we deal with is necessarily malicious. You could let's say uh, you needed to embed some sort of JavaScript in a PDF. I don't know what good reason you would have to need to do that, but let's say that you're a law firm
Hmm.
and you have a good reason to put a PDF or put a script inside a PDF. Most companies wouldn't do that, right? Because why do you need a JavaScript inside a PDF? But just for the sake of talking about it, in a lot of cases, the files that you have, as a lawyer, they can't be changed, right? They cannot be modified. You got to have chain of custody. Everything has to pass legal muster,
Right.
which means you've
You
got to
can't have any
maintain.
alterations. It has to be the same
Right,
hash as it was when
right.
it
So
was
you've
sent.
got file integrity in place, and that's huge, right? Because it
Right.
deals with the law. Um, so what you might want to do is flag certain files that fall outside of the policy, and be able to just do monitoring. Because since you can't actually modify the files, but you still want to set up a policy to say, I want to take these files and investigate them further, right? So you could
Right.
send them to a sandbox, you could send them to other advanced analysis tools. Um, so it really
Yeah.
comes
Or
down to.
even like you want to do an internal study on your company
Right.
about how many users are sending passwords in Excel files to each other
Yes.
using some
Yes.
DLP password detection tool. This would be a
Yeah.
way you could
So
hand it off to that kind of analysis. You're not blocking
right.
anything, but you're saying, okay, we gathered the data over 2 months and we can see that 70% of our users are not following our password policy. They're sharing
Right.
them. So we need to do some
Yeah. So
enforcement or make some
it really
changes.
comes down to what work do you need to be done,
Right.
and that work could be a lot of different things. They're generally very security focused, and you can set it up to have ICAP handle the communication so that, again, whatever the scanner is on the other side, it's going to focus on scanning, and it's not going to do very well at network traffic security. But on the other
Right.
side, you have the things that work really well for network traffic. So it's a very complementary solution. ICAP doesn't replace
A
the need
firewall
to
or yeah.
have, right. It doesn't replace your firewall. It doesn't replace your load balancer. It works hand in hand, right? So it's a very complementary setup that serves both, the user and really the infrastructure, right? Because it offloads the network traffic security, or it keeps the network traffic security front and center for that device that's protecting the network.
So have you seen, touched on this a little bit. Have you seen the adoption of ICAP in just traditional cybersecurity suites as something that a lot of security teams know about and utilize? Or is this something that you're finding you're bringing up to them and they're surprised
Yeah,
about how easy and plug and play and effective it is? Or maybe it's something they heard about but never explored. What's your general consensus as to the adoption of
yeah.
using ICAP as like a
So
handoff for analysis?
it's really kind of a mix. I, I get a lot of customers that they've used an ICAP solution before, and they're looking for a different one, a better one, right? So that they're already bought into the idea of the value of how easy it is to just implement an ICAP solution, right, as a sidecar to what you're doing. Um, we still do run into organizations that that they'll have an F5. We do a lot of integrations with F5, and it's very easy. It's very straightforward. However, um, not all web application teams that have, stuff that they need to protect, sometimes they feel that that responsibility is part of the network security team, right? So there are a lot of places where some organizations don't know. It's the traditional legacy, the old school mentality that
Right.
I have a checkpoint firewall,
Right,
so
'cause
we're safe.
we're mixing files versus network security kind of all in one
Yeah.
big flow. So I would imagine the traditional breakdown as to, the responsibilities within that IT and security department would be a little fuzzy when it
Yeah,
comes to that.
and it is, and not everyone wants to jump in and say, I want to be responsible for the security,
Hmm.
right? What we are
Unless you're
starting,
OPSWAT.
unless you're OPSWAT. Now, I
Yeah.
mean, the other thing that I would say is, uh, as because we're kind of talking about the traditional, your traditional type of network security. I've got a firewall, and everything is good. Um, as you start moving into the cloud, that doesn't work, right? You don't have your hardware firewall anymore. You have a lot of software based tools, and as organizations have moved more toward the cloud, we start seeing more specialized tools that people use, like Nginx, right, and ingress controller, and that's another thing that where as people start to adopt things like containers and Kubernetes, then Nginx plays a much larger role because it's very small, very configurable. There's a free version, and it really starts opening up opportunities for for companies like OPSWAT to meet customers where they're going, right? So ICAP has been around for a long time, and we try to make use of that technology wherever we can, because it exists in so many different appliances. But whether it's internal company politics and nobody really wants to take take charge of their own security. Um, as network security matures in the cloud, then we will see more stuff like Nginx that they're using to protect that web application, and we can integrate with Nginx to do the scanning there as well. So it's I think ICAP will continue to grow in visibility, but again, it's not something that's flashy, right? It's not
Right.
something that
Because
people
it just works most of the time, right?
right. It just you plug the two sides in, they talk, you get your file convictions, and then you're good to go. But as people start to diversify the ways that they are protecting their web applications and their organizations, things that are similar, right? Because we integrated with Nginx, not necessarily through ICAP, but for the same type of ICAP use cases that Nginx typically serves.
Right. We have a really good question here from the audience. The question is, does ICAP slow down internet speeds? Now, before we answer that, we did talk a little bit about how there's so many different use cases
Right.
for what you could be doing with it. So let's come up with a scenario to kind of frame this so we can work through this through this answer. Um, let's go through an environment where we have ICAP set up on a reverse proxy for
Sure.
our network, and we're using it to scan incoming files from the internet against an
Right.
antivirus, like
Sure.
McAfee, where it used to work.
Sure. Yeah.
McAfee antivirus. Checking those files for malware, and then depending on the result, letting the user access or not access those downloaded files.
Right.
So in that scenario, let's talk a little bit about the impact when it comes to performance
Sure.
in those kind of environments.
Yeah. So that I think your next question is going to be about uploads, and that this one is about downloads. So so if you want to scan user downloads, right, whether it's an MP3 file or an ISO file or anything that you're wanting to download for, work approved purposes, um, the amount of scanning impact or the amount of performance impact is going to really rely on what is it that you want to scan, right? So if I'm a user and I go to yahoo.com and I want to download, I don't know, whatever it was that they had hosted there, it's not just the file that will get scanned, right? It's all of that web traffic,
The
uh,
images, the logo, the favicon.
every
Yeah.
everything, right? So it's you, while you can filter it, you do have, you either have to spend a lot of time filtering what you want to scan that's coming from the outside, um, or you're going to spend a lot of time scanning everything, right? It's going to be just plain text pages, it's going to be CSS pages, it's going to be a lot of stuff that can't be malicious but is going to be scanned. So in those cases, you in order to minimize the user impact, you have to do a lot of filtering, right? You have to do a lot of filtering at the web proxy side, to say, we're only going to do certain types of files, follow best practices, about file size and that type of thing. And of course, you can set time limits, right? So that things time out after 2, 3, 4 minutes. It's a balance, right? Like how much do you want to scan? How much do you want to impact the users? And do you want the results to be good?
Another thing that I've seen too that's really effective is to set up your proxy caching to happen after the ICAP handoff.
Yes.
So if you go to yahoo.com and download all those, you're scanning all those images, all the favicons, everything, that user that set it up had now all those files are cached within the proxy.
Right.
So the user two, let's say you have your cache settings for 24 hours. User two, goes to yahoo.com a minute later. That's not going to rescan all those things because it's just going to grab it from the cache first before it goes and asks the internet back for those files and stuff. So that can, if your company works within a pretty closed environment of what you access, then that can be minimized greatly by having a robust cache system. But then you have to worry about how many users, what's the the total size. It's a balancing act.
And that right there, when you start getting into, there's a lot of what ifs, there's a lot of variables.
Right.
It's about having multiple layers of security. At OPSWAT, we primarily focus on server-based products because that's where our technology works best. But we never intend for people to get rid of their endpoint security. Right.
Yeah.
It's multiple things. So in a case where you have a very diverse set of users that have a diverse set of needs, you may not be able to do a download based ICAP without causing some sort of performance issue or the perception of a performance issue with the users. So you maybe implement something like that that catches the low hanging fruit for downloads, with the filtering. But then you're also going to rely on a little bit more security on the endpoint, right? Because they're just downloading a bunch of stuff, and it can be a little bit of a moving target in terms of balancing the performance expectations.
So then maybe let's good transition to something more common, I would suppose, and you kind of alluded to it with file upload. I mean, internally, when we talk about file upload, we often have that spoken hand in hand with ICAP. So, can you talk to us a little bit about that kind of use case when you're dealing with an upload integration?
Yeah. So think of any type of document, right? Anything that would be put into a PDF, docx file, a spreadsheet, PowerPoints. For all of those different types of files, they're going to be used across all different types of organizations. And let's say let's say that you're Indeed.com, right, or another recruiting type site. What you're going to do is accept a whole lot of resumes, a whole lot of headshots, a whole lot of all of these different types of files, and they're all going to come from people that you don't know. Right. That's the important part, is that when you have
open to the internet.
Yeah, I mean, it's open to everyone and anyone. All you got to do is have an email address, and then you can start uploading stuff into their site. If I were a malicious user, then I could hide stuff in a file. I could just even do something as simple as renaming a .exe to .txt, right? It's probably going to get caught, right? That's a fairly easy thing. But the thing is, I can do that all day.
Right.
I can upload junk into their system all day. And the thing is, their WAF isn't going to detect it, because as long as I'm not doing anything bad on the network traffic side, I can still continue to upload malicious files.
Right.
I could be an unknowing user and uploading files, but let's say I'm not. When you talk about uploads, well, that's where your network security appliance kicks in and says, hey, I don't necessarily want to look at this file. I can't look at the file. I don't know how to look at the file, but I'm going to send it over to the ICAP server. ICAP server is then going to do all of its levels of analysis and then give a response back. So the two differences between the download and the upload is when you're doing a download, it's much more difficult to filter what gets scanned. You can still do the scanning of the files, but with an upload, it's a little bit easier, or it's a lot easier, because those appliances have filtering built in, and it's much easier to detect a file that's being uploaded rather than all the files that are getting downloaded.
Right, because when I visit a website, all the HTML files, image files, I could be getting hundreds of files just from a single request if you break everything apart just by visiting a website. But like you mentioned, with your even your bad actor that's uploading all day long to Indeed.com or whatever job search it is, they're not going to hit anywhere near those numbers. So with the upload use case, you can put in a lot more resources to put into those analyzing techniques. You can do more with those files.
It's very focused on the files that can potentially be bad, right? Because no one's going to be uploading a lot of text files. They're going to be uploading a PDF, an image,
Excel
that may have stuff embedded in it, because you can use steganography to embed malware inside of a picture, right? So there's all of those things that can be uploaded that are just not going to be investigated. They're not going to be analyzed by the firewall.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So that's something I think is a really important distinction for the audience to kind of picture here, where you have your egress and ingress data going in or going out, and both of those have a huge different impact as what you're trying to protect. If it's downloading, you're typically trying to protect your end users from getting something nasty out from the internet. If you're doing a file upload, you're protecting your systems, you're protecting your assets from
I mean, you're much closer to that critical mass of data, of information on the upload side.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I meant to mention earlier when we were talking about the diagram, for any of the attendees in the webinar today, anybody can go and practice setting up an ICAP system. You'd need to have some kind of ICAP client, but if you download Squid Proxy, for example, it's free. You can download it. You can set up ICAP with I think it's like a config file that's like 15 lines, and you just import it into.
It's not much. There's ICAP clients, freely available, open source, Java based. that you can incorporate into your own web portal, right? If you need to, set something up to accept it, sure, you can have the ICAP client within Squid,
Yeah.
and so yeah, there's some easy ways
Just
to
test it, see
mess
how it
around with it.
works. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Just set something up with an ICAP receiver that maybe sends syslog messages that, hey,
yeah,
this was received, this was received.
sure.
It's and really can get a feel for how plug and play it is. It's the language in which it's used. We've been talking a lot about use cases and scenarios that
Mhm.
companies have to face. These are real problems that need to be addressed some way, and this technology, this protocol is here that allows for that handoff to do all these kinds of things.
Right.
And then even stepping away from the web traffic protection. I mean, it's kind of a similar concept, but we've seen a lot of NAS solutions
Mhm.
that support ICAP as well. So can you
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about how that works, and what are the
sure.
similarities and differences between a web integration versus
Yeah,
a storage integration?
sure. So it's really kind of a difference between data at rest and data in motion, or data in transit. With our traditional ICAP use cases, it's because it was really intended for use with, again, your F5s, A10s, Citrixes, all
Right.
those different standard names. Um, the the thing is, there's more than one choke point, right? So you have the choke point
Yeah.
in front of a web application. You have the choke point, which may be your S3 bucket or your Azure Blob Storage, or you're using like a Dell Isilon, right? You've got all of these different places where they are meant to store files, right? Which means, number one, it's probably very valuable, and number two, uh, you'd be in a lot of hot water if that data were to be corrupted, or if it were to be made available to unauthorized people. So when you look at storage as just another choke point, it makes sense, right? Any time a file is put into an S3 bucket, do you want to make sure it's scanned, right? So that's one thing that you can do, very similar to how ICAP works with a security appliance. We can get a trigger from S3 that a new file has been uploaded, and that file will be sent over for scanning. Thumbs up, thumbs down.
So
The other
how
key
does
thing.
how does that
Go
work?
ahead.
Is it if I'm sending a file to S3, what's the
Mhm.
typical configuration? Is it like a proxy in which I'm sending the file, and in its transit process, it does the ICAP handoff and then gets a verdict and then goes into the S3 bucket? Or is it more of like a retroactive, almost like a webhook, where, hey, I upload a file, here's the content, by the way, and
It's kind of like that, right? And so each of the integrations that we have are going to operate a little bit differently as far as storage.
uh-huh,
Now, uh, and it depends on where they put it in line. So for let's say MFT devices,
uh-huh.
right? So an MFT is going to control a lot of data, many times in between multiple organizations, and with an MFT, we can scan the file before it actually gets into the system, right? So much like a traditional ICAP type of use case. For S3, it's a little bit more difficult because we don't have visibility into the file until AWS tells us that the file is there.
Right.
So
Okay.
in each case, the result is about the same, right? Because you can set up I think AWS events to every 5 seconds. So every 5 seconds, you can check to see if a new file is there, and then grab it and scan it. But there's differences, right? It depends on what the infrastructure is that we can hook into, and for cases that for cases that don't have an actual ICAP client where we can. It's kind of think of it as a shim, right? It's a network shim that says, I'm going to use this client to send all this stuff over here. and you don't necessarily have that with S3, but you can
Right.
create some very similar use cases, very similar deployments.
It's not something that I've seen a lot of with NAS solutions using ICAP. I am curious. Have you come across a scenario where somebody's using it for like an on-prem free NAS or something like that? Have you seen any of those kind of use cases?
Not
Or
really. It's primarily what we see is, the larger MFT players.
right,
So, um, and then the larger like bulk storage, enterprise storage, Nutanix files is another one. Um, you know, it really comes down to how much security do you need on the files, and you can do a lot of extra work to try to make it secure. It works really well when you have something like ICAP, though, because you don't really need to do anything extra,
right,
right?
yeah.
You set up
I
the
mean,
scanning service, and
you
it's
just
just kind of
point it because
right.
there's a lot of other ways that we see on how local files are protected. I mean, kind of stepping away from our solutions
Mhm.
and going into more of the cloud storage. If you're uploading something to, let's say, Dropbox, they might have some kind of custom API integration that sends a file to
Sure.
be analyzed somewhere before being allowed on the website or whatever it is. And all of those things, that takes people doing a lot of work to build a
Exactly.
custom application to do something like that, and not
Yeah.
everybody's Dropbox.
Right.
you know
And I mean, that's what we see a lot of times, is that you know customers that don't necessarily know that they have ICAP, they may not also, they may not have anyone to do API coding either,
right, yeah,
because we have an API based solution, but you start asking some questions, you realize, oh, they do have something that has ICAP that
yeah.
they can
and
just plug
and
right in.
and they don't have a developer that does
Correct.
file analysis API handling, so
Correct. And so it really does open up a lot of easy options for people to implement, a very meaningful layer of security at a very critical spot in the network, right? Find those choke points, find a way to get them scanned thoroughly, get them sanitized if that's what you need to do as well, and let your MFT do the stuff that it needs to do. Let your firewall do the stuff that it needs to do, and just slide something next to it that can do the scanning.
and like you said, complementary.
Yes, very, very complimentary. There's no, one thing I do like about our products is that we're dealing with a lot of closed systems, but in a very open way, and open platform, being able to communicate with a lot of different devices, being very platform agnostic. ICAP just does that really well, so that you can have, because not every company, I mean, everyone says this, but not every company has all of the solutions that you need.
Right,
And
yeah, we have
you
we
know
have the ecosystem. And that's
right.
actually that's a good segue. We're coming up at the end of this webinar. I always like to give
Sure.
my presenters a few moments to talk about the actual product that
Yeah.
they work on here, and kind of how that fits into our ecosystem. So,
Yeah.
yeah, let's talk a little bit about your product before we
Sure.
sign off for the day.
Sure. So yeah, Metadefender ICAP server. I think of it as an extension of Metadefender Core. Core is the workhorse. It does all the work. It does the scanning. It does the sanitization. It does the DLP. It does all of those things. But there's if you don't know how to talk API, what you're kind of left with is uploading through the
You got
web.
to you got to get the files to it somehow, right? You
Yeah,
got to
you
get
got
the
to get the
files
files
to
to it.
core. Yeah,
And so what ICAP does is it allows all of the different devices that we've been talking about, to talk directly to core without any API changes, right? You set up core, you set up ICAP to look at the core server, so it knows to talk there, and then you can just start sending files to it over ICAP. There's so little in the way of configuration for ICAP. You can do all the configuration on core, to make sure that your workflows are correct. But ICAP just works as a simple, seamless interface to open up, to do that communication between core and the other products. One thing that we've done recently, I think I mentioned earlier, is Nginx, having an Nginx integration, and ICAP gets us. It's a large market, right? There's a lot of people out there that use ICAP and like ICAP, but they need something that's a little bit more nimble, that's a smaller, that they can control as a web application developer and put their own security, in front of that web application without having to worry about the network security team to finally get to their ticket, right? So they can easily implement Nginx to secure their web applications, and we've created a direct integration with Nginx to do just that.
And this is where Nginx is speaking ICAP and handing off to ICAP server.
Kind of in a way. It does get delivered along with our ICAP server. Or that functionality is part of the ICAP server, and it really lets it opens the doors to people that are using Nginx, the free version, right, to set up security for their web apps, and then of course we support Nginx Plus as well, and we have still today the only commercial AV solution that has a direct integration with Nginx. So we jumped on that when we started seeing, Apache is going down, right? Apache is not really being used or it's not in use anywhere near as much as it used to be.
It's on the decline.
Yeah, it's very quickly. Nginx is just as quickly gaining acceptance. I don't know if it's 50% of all the web servers out there are running on Nginx, and we essentially want to bring that plug and play capability to Nginx as well, right? Because it's very configurable, it's very lightweight, low resource usage, and now you have a way to set that up and have a ready-made integration to send those files that are flowing through that ingress controller over to us for scanning. So, like I said, we're trying to meet where customers are going. Right. And that's what we see. That's where we saw a gap, and so extending that same type of ICAP thought process to containers and Kubernetes and more modern applications.
Very cool. It's really awesome to see something that could seemingly be so complicated be executed so simply at the end of the day. So it's awesome stuff that you're doing. Well, Adam, thank you so much for joining me today on this webinar. Sure. And to the audience, for anybody that didn't get their questions answered, we'll be sure to follow up with you and respond via email after this webinar is over. So thank you, everybody, for joining. It was great having you on, and look forward to seeing you on the next one.
All right.